Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, January 31st, 2025. D.C. Fire and Emergency Services says the remains of two-thirds of those killed in the collision this week between an American Airlines jet and U.S. Army helicopter have been recovered. As the investigation continues, President Trump is still promoting two positions. The helicopter was not flying in an approved altitude, and FAA diversity initiatives caused a workforce that could not perform its duties to keep the skies safe. President Trump says he'll impose 25% tariffs on imported goods from Canada and Mexico and 10% tariffs on goods from China starting Saturday. The president says it is to get more cooperation from those countries to stop illegal immigration and fentanyl smuggling. Outgoing Democratic National Committee Chair Jaime Harrison gives a farewell address at the DNC winter meeting in National Harbor, Maryland. The National Association of Secretaries of State meets in D.C., discussing how state election officials can best communicate with and gain the trust of voters, especially when there are reports, true or false, of problems with the casting of ballots. And the U.S. Senate confirms Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, who will also be leading a new National Energy Council. Voice of America reports that fire and emergency service officials in Washington said Friday that more than 40 bodies have been recovered from the wreckage of a commercial passenger jet and military helicopter that collided and crashed into the Potomac River late Wednesday. Operations to recover the bodies of 67 people killed in the collision resumed at dawn Friday. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, the federal agency leading the investigation into the accident, reportedly is at the scene along with local and regional EMS crews. The NTSB reported late Thursday the cockpit voice reporter and flight data recorder from the airliner, devices often referred to as black boxes, have been recovered and are at the agency's labs for evaluation. In an interview Friday with U.S.-based Fox News Network, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the black box for the helicopter had not yet been recovered, but that its data will likely determine who was piloting the helicopter at the time of the crash. Reporting from Voice of America, John Donnelly, Washington, D.C. Fire and Emergency Medical Services Chief, gave an update at a news conference today at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport.
Overnight, our teams continued search operations and surface work, including side sonar scanning, shoreline searches, and aerial searches. Also, two Coast Guard cutters have arrived on station, and you may be able to see them out there on the water. Other efforts off-site included the NTSB, American and PAL Airlines, and district officials meeting with families at the Family Assistance Center and providing the support that they need to get through this horrible event. We have recovered 41 sets of remains, and 28 of those victims have been positively identified. And as of 6 a.m. this morning, next of kin notifications have been made to 18 families. Going forward with our recovery operations, search teams will continue to work the site. We'll do side sonar scanning, searching the shoreline, and aerial operations. Our dive teams are working in targeted areas, and additional Coast Guard assets will arrive this afternoon. The salvage crews have begun to arrive on the scene, and they're assessing the work that's going to be needed to recover the aircraft from the water. We expect those operations to begin no later than tomorrow afternoon. The teams are also working the shoreline down the river, as we do expect some debris to be dragged by the current. And if members of the public believe they have information or have discovered potential wreckage, we're asking you not to touch it and to call 911, and we will send somebody out to get it.
John Donnelly, D.C. Fire and Emergency Medical Services Chief at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. The Hill writes that President Trump on Friday doubled down on claims that the fatal mid-air collision near the airport was caused by diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI hiring practices carried out under previous administrations. This is just one reason why our country was going to hell. 4 exclamation points, Trump wrote in a Friday post. His statement was accompanied by screenshots outlining claims that the Federal Aviation Administration encouraged the hiring of individuals with psychiatric disabilities under the Biden administration, echoing comments he made during a Thursday press briefing. That was from The Hill. And President Trump also posting on Truth Social, the Black Hawk helicopter was flying too high by a lot. It was far above the 200-foot limit. That's not really too complicated to understand, is it? 3 question marks. President Trump was asked about this during an Oval Office gaggle.
President, have any concerns that your commentary about things you have described as common sense or your observations could in any way interfere with the thorough investigation of the crash?
No, I think they'll do an investigation. It'll probably come out the way I said it. I like to put it up front. I'm so tired of listening to things happen to our country and then people say we'll do an investigation and 3 years later they come out with a report that nobody looks at. Especially, not in all cases can you do that, but in this case, you know, you had a helicopter that was, the Black Hawk was too high. It was above the 200 limit by double. Shouldn't have been there. And there were some other mistakes made too, and I pointed them out also, and I was right on all of it, but they'll still do an investigation just to check it out, but I think that's what
Commander-in-Chief, are you at all concerned about opining about the Army and the conduct of that aircraft when you are Commander-in-Chief and these are the people who report to you and there is an investigation ongoing?
This was all caused by bad rules, regulations, and other things by Biden, the Biden administration. And when you look at the way they ran things, in fact, if you look, we hired, one of the first things I told them to do is to get talented people in those beautiful towers overlooking runways. You better get them in there fast because we don't have people there that are qualified. And you knew that because planes were landing very, very late. They were circling all over the place. We had people that didn't know what the hell they were doing.
And so there are planes in the air everywhere, and there are other air traffic. Pardon me, sir.
We have to have the best people, the smartest people, the sharpest people as control tower experts. And that's what they have to be. They have to be experts, and they have to be very smart. And we didn't have our best. And if you read the quote that I read yesterday at the news conference, it talked about people that were psychologically injured were okay, and people that had lots of problems were okay. I'd read it again if you'd like me to, but I don't think I have to waste your time.
Does that give you concern, though, sir, with planes in the air all around the country, people relying on that as safety? Are you suggesting there's an ongoing risk?
No, I think there's very little risk, but I think that we have to make sure that this never happens again. Very, very little risk. And we're taking actions that this can't happen again. The helicopter, as you know, was out of its zone. It shouldn't have been out of its zone. It was at the same height as the airplane. Now, the airplane was coming down on its track. It was perfect. It was in perfect shape coming down, and something was in its way. You can't let that happen. And it won't be happening again. And this was all because of weak rules in the Biden administration. And we're just not going to let that kind of thing happen again. And again, I could wait and I could, give a report in 2 years like they always do. And sometimes it's obvious. In this case, to me, it was very obvious. And I think I've been proven to be very correct.
President Donald Trump taking reporters' questions in the White House Oval Office after signing executive orders. The U.S. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, at a news conference today in Brooklyn, was asked about the president continuing to link DEI to the helicopter plane collision.
Yesterday, the President Trump has a press conference and he mentioned many times about the diversity and people are confused what he means. Can you just specify what you mean about the diversity? He's talking against the diversity.
It's a very irresponsible statement that was made by the president. Bodies are still being pulled from the Potomac. Children were killed. Future ice skating Olympians were killed. Future leaders in Wichita, Kansas, and beyond were killed as a result of this tragedy. And we don't need misdirection and we don't need misinformation coming from the highest office in the land. We need integrity, we need decency, we need leadership. There is not a scintilla of evidence that exists to suggest that women and people of color are to blame for the tragedy that took place, and it was shameful.
The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, at a news conference in Brooklyn, New York. Maryland Governor Wes Moore, also a Democrat, reacted today to President Trump's comments when the president was asked if he planned to go to the crash site. He was asked that on Thursday in the White House Oval Office.
Do you have a plan to go visit the site or meet with any of the
I have
first
a plan
responders?
to visit, not the site, because you tell me, what's the site? The water?
Or to meet with
Want
the
me to go
first
swimming?
responders down there?
I don't have a plan to do that, but I will be meeting with some people that were very badly hurt with their family member, obviously, but I'll be meeting with some of the families, yeah.
President Donald Trump in the Oval Office on Thursday. Here is Maryland Governor Wes Moore at the Democratic National Committee winter meeting, National Harbor, Maryland, today.
We saw an outpouring of support from people all over this country and, frankly, all over the globe. Because when people are in pain, it's not just their pain, it's our pain too. But we also know that in that same moment, not even 24 hours after the tragedy, a collision that took the lives of 67 people, some of them Marylanders, we also had a sitting president of the United States blame it on DEI. Less than 24 hours after the crisis, when a journalist asked if he would visit the site of the catastrophe, the president suggested that he wasn't interested in going swimming. When this country needed comfort, we got chaos. When this country needed healing, we got hatred. So this morning, I do want to reiterate what I know was on the top of each and every one of your minds, that in this morning, we want to be very clear about what is at stake in this DNC Winter Conference. We want to be very clear about the need for each and every one of your voices and for the need for leadership in this moment.
Maryland Governor Wes Moore. The Federal Aviation Administration is restricting helicopters around Reagan National Airport following Wednesday's deadly mid-air collision between an American Airlines regional jet and an Army Black Hawk helicopter, the Associated Press reported on Friday. Citing an anonymous source, the Associated Press reported that most helicopters will not be allowed to use low-to-the-ground routes that run under or parallel to the airport's flight paths. The FAA has yet to publicly confirm the AP's report. This is Washington Today. Story from Reuters. Companies, consumers, and farmers across North America braced on Friday for U.S. President Donald Trump to impose 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican imports within hours, moves that could disrupt nearly $1.6 trillion in annual trade. Trump has set a Saturday deadline to impose the punitive duties over his demands that Canada and Mexico take stronger action to halt the flow of illegal immigrants and the deadly opioid fentanyl and precursor chemicals into the U.S. Trump said on Thursday that he would soon decide whether to apply the tariffs to imports of Canadian and Mexican oil, an indication that he may be concerned about their impact on gasoline prices. Reporting from Reuters, here's an exchange between President Donald Trump and reporters today in the White House Oval Office.
Mr. President, is there anything China, Canada, and Mexico can do tonight to forestall your implementation of tariffs tomorrow?
No, nothing. Not right now, no.
Not a negotiating tool?
No, it's not. No, it's a pure economic. We have big deficits with, as you know, with all three of them. And in one case, they're sending massive amounts of fentanyl, killing hundreds of thousands of people a year with the fentanyl. And in the other two cases, they're making it possible for this poison to get in, number one. And number two, we have big deficits, and it's something we're doing. And we'll possibly very substantially increase it. We're not. We'll see how it is. But it's a lot of money coming to the United States. As you know, we have about a $200 billion deficit with Canada, getting close to $200 billion. They've treated us very unfairly. And I say, why should we be subsidizing Canada? It's wonderful. I have so many friends in Canada. It's a great place.
Is there a concession
But,
you're looking for, sir?
No, we're not looking for a concession, and we'll just see what happens. We'll see what happens. And with Mexico, it's the same thing. We have a $250 billion deficit, and we have a lot of people coming into the border, and now we've largely stopped that, but we've stopped that ourselves. I think they've done a fantastic job. You've seen the numbers. They've dropped to almost zero. But we've suffered under the past administration for years and years. We've suffered with millions of criminals coming into our country. Criminals, people from jails from all over the world. They come through Mexico, and they come through Canada too. A lot of them come through Canada, and a lot of fentanyl comes through Canada, and China makes the fentanyl. China makes the fentanyl, gives it to Mexico, puts it through Canada, puts it through different places, mostly Mexico, but also a lot through Canada. And so all three haven't treated us very well.
President Donald Trump with reporters in the White House Oval Office. Earlier in the day, the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt held a news conference and was asked about reports that the tariffs could be delayed a month. She said that wasn't true.
Friends at Reuters are reporting that the president has made a decision on the Canada and Mexico tariffs, but that they won't actually be implemented until March 1st. I was wondering if you could confirm that and talk through some of the president's thinking there.
I saw that report, and it is false. I was just with the president in the Oval Office, and I can confirm that tomorrow, the February 1st deadline that President Trump put into place at a statement several weeks ago continues. The president will be implementing tomorrow a 25% tariffs on Mexico, 25% tariffs on Canada, and a 10% tariff on China for the illegal fentanyl that they have sourced and allowed to distribute into our country, which has killed tens of millions of Americans. These are promises made and promises kept by the president.
The president yesterday said that last night he was planning to discuss whether an exemption would be made on oil imports. Do you have any information on what decision he made there, or will there be exemptions at all offered under this?
I don't have an update or readout for you on the exemptions, but those tariffs will be for public consumption in about 24 hours tomorrow, so you can read them then.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt at a White House news conference later, as the president spoke to reporters in the Oval Office, he said that the tariffs on oil could likely drop to 10%. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau held a news conference in Toronto saying Canada is making progress on stopping fentanyl trafficking and illegal immigration and will strike back with tariffs of their own if President Trump moves ahead.
Right now, we're showing the new American administration that they have a strong partner in Canada when it comes to upholding border security, all while simultaneously underscoring that we won't back down. That if tariffs are implemented against Canada, we will respond. We won't relent until tariffs are removed, and of course, everything is on the table. Part of what this council has been doing is pulling together perspectives from across industries, from across different parts of the country, to make sure that anything we do will be fair right across the country, that all Canadians will share in the job of standing up for our interests and, quite frankly, standing up to defend the most successful trading relationship in the world. One of the things that this council has been very strong on is saying that this is the opportunity for Canada to move forward internally on free trade within Canada. As we look at challenges with the United States, as we sign free trade deals over the past years with the world, we know that internally, within provinces and across territories, there are barriers that exist that would be better for Canadian businesses, Canadian workers, and the Canadian economy if we removed. So we have stepped up our actions on internal trade. As we speak right now, Minister Anita Anand is hosting a meeting of provincial trade ministers elsewhere in this building to move forward on ambitious proposals on internal trade. We know there are things we can do to increase Canada's competitiveness and effectiveness in a more complex world. And moving forward on internal trade with new energy is something that this council has been directly encouraging us and responsible for us doing. Of course, I won't sugarcoat it. Our nation could be facing difficult times in the coming days and weeks. I know Canadians might be anxious and worried, but I want them to know the federal government, and indeed all orders of government, have their backs.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at a news conference in Toronto, Canada. Article from Reuters, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said on Friday she will wait with a cool head for a decision from the United States ahead of a Saturday deadline set by U.S. President Donald Trump to impose 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican imports. She said, "We will always defend the dignity of our people, respect for our sovereignty, and a dialogue as equals without subordination. We will wait, as I have always said, with a cool head. When taking decisions, we are prepared and we maintain this dialogue." That was from Reuters. Yahoo Finance writes U.S. stocks lost ground on Friday after the White House said tariffs against Mexico, Canada, and China will take effect on Saturday, reigniting fears of a coming trade war with the nation's closest trading partners. Dow down 337, NASDAQ down 54, S&P down 30. And the Washington Post writes a federal judge on Friday blocked the Trump administration from imposing another freeze to federal spending, siding with roughly 24 state attorneys general who had argued that an interruption to critical government aid would harm their citizens. The 13-page decision, signed by John J. McConnell Jr., the chief judge for the U.S. District Court for the District of Rhode Island, delivered another political blow to the White House just days after it rescinded its policy in the face of widespread confusion, public backlash, and legal threats. That was from the Washington Post. And Washington Today continues in a moment.
Listening to programs on C-SPAN through C-SPAN Radio is easy. Tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio, and listen to Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern. Important public affairs events throughout the day. And weekdays, catch Washington Today. Listen to C-SPAN anytime. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. A few more headlines from Associated Press. The Defense Department will no longer reimburse service members for travel out of state to get reproductive health care, including abortions and fertility treatments, according to a new memo. The directive signed this week eliminates a rarely used Biden administration policy enacted in October 2022 after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and more states began to impose increased abortion restrictions. And a senior Trump administration official has traveled to Venezuela to urge President Nicolas Maduro's government to take back deported migrants who've committed crimes in the U.S. and release a handful of imprisoned Americans. A U.S. official said Friday the visit by Richard Grenell, who U.S. President Donald Trump appointed as an envoy for special missions, may come as a surprise to some Venezuelans who hope that Donald Trump would continue the maximum pressure campaign he pursued against the authoritarian Venezuelan leader during his first term. Another AP article, as the Democratic National Committee prepares to elect a new chair, its departing leader says Democrats should have stuck with Joe Biden in the 2024 race. In an interview with the Associated Press, Jaime Harrison reflected on why his party lost to Donald Trump and what might have happened had then Vice President Kamala Harris had more time to campaign after Biden ended his re-election bid following a disastrous debate performance. He also offered advice to his eventual successor, who will be chosen Saturday. The next DNC chair, Harrison said, needs to insist that the party not be a rubber stamp to its presidential candidate. That was reporting from AP. Jaime Harrison gave his farewell speech today at the DNC winter meeting in National Harbor, Maryland. He said the Democratic brand is toxic in some parts of the country, and that needs to change.
One of the things I wanted to do early on in my first year was to do a brand study for the DNC, because I firsthand knew that we had problems with our Democratic brand in parts of the country and in parts of our community. When I ran for the United States Senate in South Carolina, yes, we had tons of money. But folks, I can tell you this. Santa Claus could have run and the election could have been on Christmas Day. But if he had a D behind his name in some parts of our state, he would lose and lose badly. Not because anybody ever heard of what he said or what he did, but because of the deed and what it represented in the minds of those voters. And it was misinformation and disinformation, not because it was wedded in the truth, but because people for years have been pouring all of this negativity into the perception of who we are as a party. That has to fundamentally change. And it is not a bunch of money that changes that. I told you all when I ran for the DNC back in 2016 that the Democratic Party can't just be a political organization. It has to be a community organization. It has to be embedded in the communities, working with people 365 days a year. Because when you work with folks, and most importantly, when you help people, it's hard as hell to then define them as the demon. It's hard to define them as the opposition.
Outgoing DNC Chair Jaime Harrison at the DNC winter meeting at National Harbor, Maryland. The DNC members will elect a new chair on Saturday. Guardian newspaper writes the race has attracted a large field of candidates, but two state party chairs, Ken Martin of Minnesota and Ben Wickler of Wisconsin, have emerged as the frontrunners. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat of New York, chair of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, also spoke at today's DNC meeting about the 2026 midterm elections, when 33 of the 100 Senate seats will be on the ballot, and currently 20 of those seats are held by Republicans versus 13 by Democrats. Here's Senator Gillibrand with what message the Democrats should have.
The simple fact is that American voters felt that we were not on their side or weren't focused enough on their issues that they wanted us to be talking about. They felt that a man who cuts taxes for the wealthiest Americans and who surrounds himself with tech billionaires would somehow do a better job fighting for their families. That is a gut punch, plain and simple. But I know, and you know, that politics is a combat sport. Sometimes you get knocked down. The important thing is what you do when you get back up and keep moving forward. That is how the Democratic Senate candidates won in states across the country, even when President Trump carried those states. So in Wisconsin, in Arizona, in Nevada, in Michigan, our Democratic candidates, Tammy Baldwin, Ruben Gallego, Jackie Rosen, Alyssa Slotkin, emerged victorious. So you have to know, how did they do it? A relentless, unwavering focus on the issues that mattered to those voters the most. The cost of things, the cost of eggs, the cost of meat, the cost of milk. Public safety. Can my daughter walk to school on her own? Can she walk through the park? Can my family know that they're safe? These were the issues that voters were most focused on in those purple and red states. And it makes sense. If you are worried about putting food on the table, if you're worried about whether your kids are going to be safe at school or whether your first responders are getting attacked on the subway by gang members, these worries will dominate your thinking. You won't be thinking as much about other issues, whether it's democracy or reproductive rights or the environment. And so we just have to reckon with what people are thinking and how they voted and why they voted the way they did. These kinds of issues have always been at the heart of the Democratic Party and American families. If Democrats are going to win, we have to make sure that these issues remain at the forefront of the message. It doesn't have to be the only message. We're always going to care about everything else, but they have to hear it. And there's a lot of noise. You know how much noise there is. People receive their news not from television, not from the newspaper, but from their phones. And you know the phones can so easily be used for malign foreign influence, for misinformation, for targeted messaging to harm people and how they see the world. That's what we were up against, and we will fight back on that very issue. So we only need to look at President Trump for what we're going to think and talk about. If you look at what he's done in his first few weeks, how many days? 10 days of his administration, he has cut funding to make kids be hungry, to make our seniors be hungry, to make our first responders not have the equipment they need, to not let the firefighters get the equipment and support they need to fight these fires in California or fight the fires in New York. He's blocked funding for every after-school program, every early childhood education program. You can't imagine the damage he's done every day to the people that we serve every day. And has he mentioned the cost of eggs once? No, he has not. Has he mentioned the cost of housing once? No, he has not. He is not talking about the issues that the American people want us and him to be talking about. So I think this is an opportunity for us. Instead of issuing the orders to block funding for the law enforcement, the fire departments, nutrition assistance, veterans care in our schools, threatening trade wars with important allies, We can be talking about what people care most about. And make no mistake about it, this tax bill that they're writing right now is also going to harm everyday working Americans. It will be a huge giveaway to the tech billionaires and the ultra wealthy at the expense of middle-class families and working families. So we have this opportunity to contrast their priorities and what they're doing with who we care about and who we're fighting for, and be relentlessly on message.
Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat from New York, chair of the DSCC Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee at the DNC winter meeting at National Harbor, Maryland. Semaphore News article this week, Tim Scott just got to the helm of the Senate Republican campaign arm, and he's already working on a feat that could make his job a lot easier. The newly elected chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee met last week with Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, who's emerging as the top political GOP recruit for the midterm elections as the party seeks a challenger to Senator Jon Ossoff, Democrat of Georgia. Kemp is listening to Scott. The two met ahead of the inauguration and have been texting. Reporting by Semaphore News. Election Administration Crisis Management was the subject of a panel at today's National Association of Secretaries of State Winter Conference in Washington, D.C. The title of the workshop was We Didn't Start the Fire, 2024 Election Crisis Communications, Look Back and Lessons Learned. Two of the participants were Pennsylvania Secretary of State Al Schmidt, a Republican, and Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon, a Democrat. First, Secretary Schmidt.
You would think this is a pretty simple decision tree. Like something arises, is this a real crisis or something that isn't real or has no basis in fact? But one thing I think that we've all experienced, especially recently, is that because even if something doesn't have a basis in fact and isn't a real problem, doesn't mean that people don't think it's a real problem. And there is immense harm that comes from that. So I think my initial reaction a lot of times when we faced accusations that there was some like fictitious truckload of ballots coming to Philadelphia, smuggled in from China, smuggled in by Italian organized crime figures in South Philly or whatever. It was like nonsense. Like you wouldn't watch, you'd change that channel. You'd walk out of that movie. It was so absurd. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't sort of get around and take hold and has immense damage to not just confidence in elections, but for the people who work in elections at the county level and at the precinct level that receive threats of violence and intimidation and all the rest. So I think one thing was, the default is to disregard things because they're nonsense, but they really have to be addressed. And unfortunately, the more fantastical they are, the harder they are to address because it's not a matter of saying like, no, Joe Frazier, the deceased voter, Joe Frazier, famous boxer in Philly, no one voted for him. Like that's easy to disprove, or other things are easy to disprove. And while it's so far-fetched that there would be a truckload of ballots where you have a record of everybody who voted, number of votes that are counted, and all the rest, sometimes the more fantastical it is, the harder it is to disprove, and the more damage it can do in terms of confidence in elections and threats of violence and intimidation targeting our election officials.
Excellent point.
Can I
Sir,
just
yes.
add to that? I think the silver lining here for all of us, I don't want to speak for any other Secretary of State, but I bet in all of our states, the message to voters is the more you look, the more you like. So to those who are skeptical or even hostile, the more we as trusted sources, along with partners, can say about what the system really is, the more trust we'll get, I think. And that's hard, and it can be a years-long effort, but I think that's why I think the Trusted Info Initiative is really important to say, hey, look to certain sources. We can explain these things. If you're skeptical about, say, the tabulating equipment, if you're convinced that they're all hacked or Elon Musk is controlling it or whatever it is, let us explain, let us share, let us show, not just tell. And I think that's important.
Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon and Pennsylvania Secretary of State Al Schmidt on a bipartisan panel with other secretaries of state at today's National Association of Secretaries of State Winter Conference in Washington, D.C. AP has a story. The nation's cybersecurity agency has played a critical role in helping states shore up the defenses of their voting systems, but its election mission appears uncertain amid sustained criticism from Republicans and key figures in the Trump administration. President Donald Trump has not yet named a new head of the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and for the first time since it was formed, there are no plans for anyone in its leadership to address the main annual gathering of the nation's secretaries of state, which was being held this week in Washington. Reporting from AP. A New York Times page tracking President Donald Trump's cabinet nominees shows 8 have been confirmed so far by the Senate, and 14 more are still pending. The latest to be confirmed was Thursday night. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum. The vote was 79-18. President Trump has also named Doug Burgum to lead a new National Energy Council. Before the confirmation vote, senators spoke on the Senate floor about the nominee, energy production, and conservation. Senator Jim Justice is a Republican from West Virginia.
Here's a man that really, nature, the beauty of our lands, touches soul. He'll protect that. And absolutely on top of that, we have an energy crisis in this country like you can't imagine. West Virginia knows energy. Jim Justice knows energy. Doug Burgum knows it too. And President Trump knows that absolutely of everything, energy is the most important of all today. It solves inflation. It provides for our defense. It is absolutely the key, the answer to everything. I'll promise you that President Trump knows this, and Doug Burgum knows this. I can tell you from the bottom of my heart, and I hope everyone will listen to just this. If we don't get a handle on our energy situation in this country, a year and a half from today, we'll be deciding between homes and jobs. We'll be deciding between homes and opportunity for all of our people. We'll be deciding between homes and industry. We will have the biggest crisis that you can ever imagine, and it will absolutely come down to just this. Are we going to give all the advancements? Are we going to give China every opportunity under the sun? Or are we going to have those opportunities? Now, I also believe just this. In this world, as a businessman, I've never seen a situation where you can purely cut your way out of a mess. I've never seen that. Now, does that mean we don't mind the store? Of course we do. Does that mean we don't cut out unnecessary waste? We best better. That's all there is to it. We better mind the store and do what's right in the greatest way imaginable. But with all that being said, we've got to grow revenue. We have a $2.5 trillion hole in the bucket. We got to grow revenue. Well, what's the secret to Emerald City? What's the secret right now to Emerald City? It's energy. It abounds all around us, and the United States of America could dominate as an energy leader throughout the entire world.
Senator Jim Justice, Republican from West Virginia, on the Senate floor Thursday before the successful confirmation vote for Interior Secretary Doug Burgum. Senator Brian Schatz, Democrat from Hawaii, spoke against the nomination.
To the extent that there are some folks who thought we were moving too fast in the direction of a clean energy transformation, and maybe we should slow down, and maybe we should look at the mix, and maybe we should do natural gas if we can get the methane part of this under control. All of that is like, I might not agree with it, but I can kind of see where you're coming from depending on your geography and depending on your politics. But that's not what just happened. What just happened is they said wind is dead on the offshore. And they're trying to do as much of this as possible to create a demand for coal, right? For fossil gas. And so I am deeply worried about Lee Zeldin and Mr. Wright and Mr. Burgum. I'll also tell you that I was inclined to be open-minded to Mr. Burgum because he has a very good relationship with his tribes. And as the ranking member of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, I have come to take seriously the idea that as I work with Mark Wayne Mullen and Lisa Murkowski and Jerry Moran and John Hoven and a bunch of people with whom I don't necessarily vote the same way, we have common cause when it comes to protecting the treaty and trust obligations and rights. I was just complimenting you, Mr. Moran, of Native people, Native Hawaiians, Native Alaskans, and Native American Indians. And so I was inclined to have a good conversation with Mr. Burgum and at least consider voting for him. And let me tell you why I'm voting no. 2 reasons. One is, I do believe what happened this week is unlawful. I think it's unconstitutional, and I think it was presenting us with a constitutional crisis. And so in a moment of it being a close call, I'm going to err on the side of expressing my opposition to what the Trump administration is doing as it relates to federal spending. But I also specifically said I'd like to have a phone call with Mr. Burgum. And I'm not like, look, I have an ego like the rest of us, but I am not one to get my nose out of joint, except playing basketball against my older brother, about someone not getting back to me or treating me, with the proper protocol. But one of the reasons you vote for a secretary is to have a working relationship should anything come up, whether it has to do with tribal equities or Native Hawaiian issues or federal land in the state of Hawaii or anything that comes under the Department of Interior. And Mr. Burgum, I guess, just doesn't feel that he needs my vote because we were never able to land the phone call. And so I'll vote no today. And I hope that we can continue to explore the possibility of working together and compromising where we can and fighting where we must.
Senator Brian Schatz, Democrat from Hawaii, on the Senate floor Thursday before the Senate voted 79-18 to confirm Doug Burgum for Interior Secretary. The Senate also voted to limit debate on the nominations of Chris Wright for Energy Secretary and Doug Collins for Veterans Affairs Secretary, with confirmation votes for them expected early next week. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.